I think we will take Nancy Lindisfarne next. Is that okay, Nancy? Okay, great. So let me introduce Nancy. Nancy taught anthropology at the School of Oriental and African Studies for many years. She's the author of Bartered Brides, Politics, Gender and Marriage in Afghan Tribal Society. She's also authored a short story collection, Dancing in Damascus, and is the co-editor of Dislocating Masculinity and of Masculinities Under Neoliberalism. Her book with Richard Tapper and Afghan Village Voices was published in 2020. She has a blog on gender, class, and Middle Eastern politics. So Nancy, please go ahead.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. And hello all. I'm coming in at a place in the order which I find rather unexpected. And I wonder if I can't sort of both summarize a number of points that have been made already, but also to pick up what Ajamu was just saying, because I found that quite inspiring, quite hopeful. And maybe I'll have something to contribute there. I absolutely agree with the speakers who have said that this is a military victory for the Taliban and also a political victory. And I think what hasn't been mentioned so far is that I believe that the Taliban actually won because they had popular support. Nobody can win a guerrilla war anywhere without actually having support on the ground for ordinary people. And this has to be factored into what one's understanding. I think it's very important to understand that this is not because the Afghans necessarily are fanatical Muslims or love the Taliban, but just because the actual American occupation was so horrifically corrupt and very, very violent, very ugly. So those things need to be part of where we might go next, where some kind of hope might lie. Another point which was mentioned just in passing is I think it's very important to understand that the war on terror has actually been it's been politically defeated in the United States. This is what Trump was offering. He was wanting a withdrawal. It's an isolationist thing. It was, I mean, he's an unspeakable racist, but there was definitely a support for him withdrawing from the Afghan war. And Biden has picked this up, as we've just heard described. And I think that is in itself extremely interesting and part of what we have to factor in here. And I think it comes from, as somebody said much earlier, I mean, I think the first speaker was actually talking about the small numbers of Americans fighting in what is, after all, a non-conscript, politically a professional army. But if you look at the actual shape of the people who are being harmed, who are going back for time and time again, other kinds of service duties 3 and 4 times into Afghanistan, into Iraq, of course, these people in these communities understand how desperate it is and so on. So that kind of political shape, I think, is not to be ignored. And it comes with a need to actually reassess the Obama surge and the kind of essential imperial project of the mainstream political establishment that he was exacting, I suppose. Okay, I think it is a turning point in world history. This is, after all, a very great military power that was defeated by a small group of desperately poor people wearing sandals when they started out and so forth. And this does weaken the American empire. It does open up or create this utterly new dynamic between a rising financial center in China, the projects of Belt and Road, and so on. So it is a very important moment. And from that, I want to come back and say something else about the country itself. As I can understand it, the Taliban took over with almost no bloodshed. So this was something that was set up. It wasn't happening quickly. It was actually set up for a long, long time. My own understanding from many Afghans that one talks to and knows is that they are genuinely ambitious to rule the country and to rule it ecumenically. In other words, one of the things that the new Taliban, the people that came back, not the earlier ones, was that they understood they couldn't be Pashtun chauvinists, that they did actually need to be inclusive to actually bring other ethnic groups in. And this seems to be the case in terms of what's happened in the north, in terms of cities that have fallen and so forth. They're not Pashtun. They have supporters in all of those areas and in Herat, so on. So we've got a group of people who are not democratic, of course not, who are fundamentalist in very many ways, but who have actually wanted to, I think, bring a certain kind of peace, and have been welcomed for these reasons. And they are also, and this is important and again not mentioned, they actually have not been corrupt. They've created a kind of judicial system which many Afghans who don't necessarily care for them at all have gone to, because the actual Ghani government and the Karzai government before that were so corrupt, and there was no political, you couldn't take cases, civil cases, for instance, to the judges within the government system without finding yourself paying great bribes and so forth. So the inequality that a corrupt judicial system allows, supports, is also something that so far the Taliban have managed to avoid. Whether they can go on doing this, God only knows. And this is where I think we need to think very wisely about what might happen next. The country is, the government is very vulnerable financially. As I understand it, the Americans have still locked in whatever wealth funds they have in the Fed. That makes it very difficult for other agencies, anybody else who wants to actually support the Afghan people to actually transfer money into the country. So there is a real financial problem. There will be starvation very, very soon because there is another drought that is coming. So this drought is, I think, enormously important in what has happened, but also what should happen. We have, and again, we've heard this, we have the surrounding powers playing a very careful game politically, because they don't want an enormous number of refugees. Both Iran and Pakistan have been making nice with the Taliban. We've heard our Russian colleague actually talking about the Central Asian republics and their fear of the Taliban actually coming and inspiring a kind of Muslim revolt. We've understood about China and the Belt and Road and the interest there. It will be very interesting to see whether these countries financially are able to support the Taliban and step in where the Americans have stepped out. And that is important. And we know that there are many aid agencies that are actually trying to do something in the circumstances of very desperate people. And one of the things that is absolutely, sorry, this is the anti-war thing, and this is the trying to make another way of thinking about things. There is climate change. There is a drought in this country. There is a desperation. And if one can imagine an anti-war movement, which actually begins to think in terms of climate, it is possible to actually think of aid agencies, money coming in to make this, in a dream, I suppose, a sort of poster country for how change might happen. Jobs being brought in, green jobs being brought in, climate jobs being brought in, with the idea, quite simply, of finding a way for the Afghans to have a livelihood, to transform their country, to protect themselves against drought, and perhaps to actually manufacture wind turbines, solar panels, and so forth, and begin to export them. In other words, think really transformatively. It seems to me that without a couple of visions, without a bit of a dream here, we lose the chance that this real break in sort of global politics can provide us. So there we go.